Wife falsely accused me of sexually assaulting my daughter after a dream, but our cameras exposed the truth. I came home from work that day, pretty much like any other day. It was a normal weekday, nothing special about it. I was tired, but not completely wiped out. You know, the kind of tired where you're looking forward to just chilling out on the couch for a while. I walked through the door and everything seemed quiet. I found my wife on the couch asleep, which was a little weird. She never naps during the day, but I thought she must have had a rough day. Our daughter, who's just 6 months old, was laying next to her, wide awake, kind of squirming. I went over to them, planning to say hi and maybe take my daughter to her room to play for a bit so my wife could rest. That's when I noticed the smell. You know that unmistakable smell when a baby needs a diaper change? Yeah, that hit me right away. I figured my wife must have been exhausted and just didn't get a chance to change her yet, so I thought, no big deal, I'll just do it. I didn't want to wake her. She works hard, and if she's napping, she probably really needs it. I scooped up my daughter and took her to her room to change her. It's a routine thing, nothing out of the ordinary. I laid her down on the changing table and started getting the wipes and a fresh diaper ready. I had barely started when I heard footsteps behind me. I figured my wife must have woken up and come to check on us. I turned around to say hi, maybe crack a joke about her catching a rare nap, but before I could say anything, she came at me like I'd done something terrible. Her face was full of anger, and before I knew it, she started yelling. And I don't mean just raising her voice a little. She was screaming at me. How could you? She shouted over and over again, and honestly, I had no clue what she was talking about. I stood there, frozen for a second, trying to process what was happening. All I could think was, what is going on? Then she started hitting me, like really hitting me, not just pushing me away or something. It all happened so fast, I didn't know what to do. My main concern was our daughter, who was laying right there on the changing table, and I didn't want her to get hurt. So I leaned over her, trying to shield her from my wife's blows. It was just pure instinct. I didn't even have time to think about defending myself or reacting. I just wanted to make sure our baby was safe. My wife was still screaming at me, saying something about me being a monster, but her words weren't making sense. I was just trying to block the hits while keeping our daughter safe. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking, what the hell did I do? What is she talking about? Eventually, she stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, completely shocked and confused. I was still holding onto the edge of the changing table, trying to catch my breath and calm my racing heart. I didn't know what had just happened. It felt like my brain couldn't catch up with everything. One minute I was doing something as simple as changing a diaper, and the next, my wife was attacking me like I had done something unspeakable. About 5 minutes later, I heard a knock on the door. At first I thought maybe my wife had come back to talk things through, but no, it was the police. 3 officers stood there, and I honestly thought I was dreaming or something. I hadn't processed what had just happened, and now there were cops at my door. They told me I was being arrested. I was still in shock, trying to figure out what they were even talking about. My wife was behind them, crying hysterically, telling them that I had hurt our daughter. I kept asking her, "What are you talking about?" But she didn't respond. She just kept repeating that she had seen me doing something to our daughter. I could barely believe what was happening. They cuffed me right there in front of our house and took me to the station. That night in jail was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just sat there trying to make sense of what had just happened. How had my wife gone from peacefully sleeping on the couch to accusing me of something so horrific? Why was she acting like this? My mind was racing, and I just kept replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out what had triggered her reaction. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but at that moment, I felt like my world was falling apart. The next day, they reviewed the footage from the baby monitor in our daughter's room. Thank God I had set that thing up a while back because it was the only thing that saved me. The camera showed exactly what had happened, me walking in, picking up our daughter, and taking her to change her diaper. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't touch her in any inappropriate way. I didn't hurt her, nothing. It was just a regular diaper change. That footage was all the evidence they needed, and I was released. You'd think I would have felt relieved, but I didn't. The fact that my wife had accused me of something so horrific, something I would never, ever do, shook me to my core. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. How could she think I would ever harm our daughter? How could she attack me like that and then call the cops, making me out to be some kind of monster? I walked back into my house after that nightmare of a night in jail, and it was dead silent. Normally, I'd hear my wife humming or the TV going, maybe the soft little coos from our daughter, but none of that. The house felt empty, and it hit me just how much had changed in less than 24 hours. I don't know what I was expecting when I stepped back inside, but the reality of it all started sinking in. I sat down on the couch, the same spot where my wife had been asleep just the day before. The same couch where I'd picked up our daughter, thinking I was just doing a normal dad thing. Now, everything felt tainted. The silence was almost too much, like it was pressing down on me. I felt like a stranger in my own home. I sat there going through the motions of everything that had happened, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. How could she do this to me? How could she call the cops on me like that? I had done nothing wrong, but in her eyes, I was this monster. She had painted me as the bad guy, and it didn't make any sense. The woman I married, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had turned my life upside down in a matter of minutes. After a while, I decided to check my phone. I hadn't looked at it since everything went down. I wasn't exactly in a hurry to face the world, but when I turned it on, it was flooded with messages. Missed calls, texts, you name it. All from her. I didn't even know where to start, so I just opened the first one. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Can we please talk?" That was one of the first messages she sent, and I could feel my blood boiling. Didn't mean it? She had me arrested. She had me sitting in a cell, terrified that my life was over, and all she could say was she didn't mean it? I scrolled through more of the messages, and it was all the same. Apologies, asking to talk, suggesting we go to counseling. I couldn't even process all the messages because none of them had any real explanation. She kept saying sorry, over and over, but never once explained why she had freaked out the way she did. Why did she think I'd hurt our daughter? Why did she attack me? Why call the police? These were the things I needed answers to, and yet all I was getting was sorry. I sat there staring at my phone, and for the first time since it all went down, I started to realize I didn't love her anymore. I don't know when it happened, but something inside me just shut off. It was like a switch had flipped. The woman who was supposed to be my partner, my best friend, the mother of my child. How could I ever trust her again? How could I stay married to someone who thought I was capable of doing something so horrible? I felt like I was sinking into a deeper pit of confusion and anger. My mind kept racing. What if we didn't have that baby monitor? What if I couldn't prove my innocence? I'd be sitting in a jail cell right now, my life completely destroyed, all because of a false accusation. And that's the part that scared me the most. If I hadn't installed that camera, I don't even want to think about what would have happened next. And then there were the texts from family and friends. They weren't exactly helping either. A bunch of people telling me that maybe I was being too harsh, that we could work through this, that I should give her another chance. They were saying things like, it was probably just a misunderstanding, and maybe she's stressed from being a new mom. Everyone had an excuse for her behavior, but not a single person could explain to me why she thought I'd harm our daughter. It felt like nobody was on my side. Not even my own family seemed to understand what had happened. They kept asking me to consider her feelings, saying that maybe she just made a mistake, but they didn't have to live through what I had. They didn't have to deal with the police at their door or spend the night in a cold cell, not knowing what was going to happen next. After reading through what felt like hundreds of messages, I tossed my phone aside and tried to clear my head. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that my marriage was over. And not just because I was angry or hurt, but because I couldn't trust her anymore. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, right? Without it, what's left? I kept thinking about what the next steps were. Divorce felt like the only real option at this point. I couldn't imagine staying in a marriage where I had to constantly look over my shoulder, wondering if my wife would accuse me of something else. I didn't want to live like that, and I sure as hell didn't want my daughter growing up in a home where her parents didn't trust each other. The worst part is, even as I made the decision to end things, I still didn't know why it happened. I felt like I was missing a giant piece of the puzzle, but I wasn't about to wait around and find out. Whatever had caused her to act like that, it didn't change the fact that she had crossed a line that I couldn't forgive. I'd always wonder, what's next? What if she does it again? I can't live like that, and I won't. That evening, I called my lawyer. I told him everything that had happened, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice. He agreed that divorce was probably the best option, given the circumstances. He also thought I had a good chance of getting full custody of our daughter, especially with the video footage showing my wife's violent outburst. As I sat there listening to him talk about legal stuff, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because things were getting easier, but because I finally felt like I was taking control of the situation. I wasn't just sitting around waiting for things to get worse. I was making a decision, and it felt like the right one. I went to bed that night still replaying everything in my head, but there was a small sense of clarity. My marriage was over, and there was no going back. I wasn't happy about it, but I knew it was the only way to move forward. I had to think about my daughter, and I had to think about myself. I couldn't stay in a relationship where I didn't feel safe, where I didn't feel like I could trust the person I was supposed to spend my life with. And with that, I closed my eyes, knowing the hardest part was yet to come. A few days after I talked to my lawyer, the reality of everything really started to hit me. It wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was the entire fallout. Every time I checked my phone, there were new messages. Family, friends, even some people I hadn't spoken to in years, and most of them weren't on my side. I had expected support, or at least understanding, but instead, all I kept getting was pushback. Everyone seemed to think I was overreacting. "She made a mistake," they said. "She's just stressed out. You have to think about your daughter." Yeah, like I wasn't thinking about my daughter this whole time. That's the thing that pissed me off the most. Everyone acting like I was being reckless or selfish, like I wasn't doing this for her too. I was the one trying to protect her from growing up in a messed up environment, but nobody seemed to get that. My mom called me at least 3 times a day. She's always been the type to meddle, but this was next level. Every conversation was the same. Her telling me to forgive my wife, to give her a second chance, that everyone makes mistakes. But she wasn't there. She didn't see how bad it got. She wasn't the one being falsely accused of the most disgusting thing imaginable. I told her that too, but it didn't matter. It's like everyone had already made up their minds that I was the one taking things too far. Even my best friend Tom, who I thought would understand, started giving me grief about it. He came over one night to check in on me, and the second he walked in, I could tell where the conversation was going. He sat down, grabbed a seat on my couch, and just looked at me for a second before he said, "Man, are you sure you want to go through with this?" I just stared at him, not sure if I should even bother responding. "Of course I'm sure. What other choice do I have?" He sighed, like he was disappointed in me or something. "I just feel like maybe there's more to it. Maybe she freaked out for a reason. New moms go through a lot. Maybe she wasn't in her right mind." That was when I lost it. "Not in her right mind? She called the cops on me, Tom. She told them I hurt our daughter when all I did was change a diaper. You think that's something I can just brush off? You think I can forget about that?" Tom looked at me, his expression softening a little. "I get it, man. I do. But you gotta ask yourself if this is worth blowing up your entire family over." I stood up, too angry to sit still anymore. She already blew it up. The second she accused me of something so disgusting, she blew it up. Tom didn't say much after that, but it was clear he didn't agree with me. He left not long after, leaving me more frustrated than I was before he came over. It was like everyone had forgotten what had actually happened. Everyone was so focused on keeping the peace, on fixing things, but nobody seemed to care that I was the one who had been blindsided by all of this. I tried to focus on my daughter after that. She was the only thing keeping me grounded. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded of why I was doing this. I wanted her to grow up in a safe environment, with parents who loved and protected her, not in a home where one of them was falsely accused of hurting her. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to me either. But then there was the issue of custody. My lawyer was confident that I had a good case for full custody, especially with the video footage proving I did nothing wrong, and my wife's violent outburst on camera. But nothing in life is guaranteed, especially not in court. There was always a chance that things could go the other way, that the judge might give my wife joint custody, or worse, primary custody. That thought kept me up at night. As much as I hated the idea of staying married to someone I couldn't trust, the idea of losing my daughter scared me more than anything else. What if the court didn't believe me? What if they thought I was overreacting, just like everyone else seemed to? What if they decided to give my wife the benefit of the doubt, just because she was the mother? I knew how these things worked. Fathers don't always get a fair shake in court, no matter what the facts are. I started documenting everything after that. Every text she sent me, every time she called, every voicemail, everything. I didn't know if it would help, but I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to make sure that if it came down to it, I had proof that I wasn't the one blowing things out of proportion. I wasn't the one who had done something wrong. My wife tried calling me a few times after that. I didn't pick up. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not after everything that had happened. She left a few voicemails, though, and I listened to them. Most of them were more of the same, apologizing, asking to go to counseling, saying she didn't know what came over her that day. But none of it was enough. None of it explained why she had done what she did, and that was the part I couldn't get past. I wasn't interested in marriage counseling. I wasn't interested in trying to fix something that felt completely broken. I couldn't see a future where I would ever trust her again, and without trust, what was the point? Every time I imagined staying with her, all I could think about was how I'd always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if she'd snap again. I couldn't live like that, and I wouldn't put my daughter through that either. So I called my lawyer again and told him to move forward with the divorce. I wanted full custody, and I was prepared to fight for it. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew I'd probably lose even more friends and family over it, but at that point, I didn't care anymore. I had to do what was right for my daughter and for myself. I had to put us first, even if nobody else seemed to understand that. And honestly, if they couldn't get behind me on this, then maybe they weren't people I needed in my life anyway. The divorce process was dragging on, and honestly, it was wearing me down. Every day felt like a new battle, not just with my soon-to-be ex-wife, but with everyone around me. Family, friends, co-workers. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone thought they knew what was best for me, for my daughter, for my marriage. But the more people tried to get involved, the more I just wanted to block it all out. I was tired, exhausted, really. It felt like I was constantly defending myself for making the only decision that made sense to me. I remember one night, after putting my daughter to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table with a stack of paperwork my lawyer had sent over, custody agreements, financial stuff, all the details that come with ending a marriage. I sat there, staring at the pages, trying to make sense of all the legal jargon. But my mind kept wandering. I couldn't stop thinking about how things used to be, how easy it all seemed before. Back when we first got married, I thought we were solid. I really did. Sure, we had our arguments like any couple, but nothing major. I never thought we'd end up here, me sitting at a table figuring out how to split our lives apart. It's crazy how quickly things can change. One minute you think you've got everything under control, and the next, it's all slipping through your fingers. I had a lot of moments like that, just sitting there thinking about how I got to this point. And every time I did, I came back to the same conclusion. I couldn't go back. I couldn't unsee what had happened. Even if I tried to move past it, that doubt would always be there. I'd always wonder if she could snap again, accuse me of something worse, and drag us all through hell one more time. I couldn't live like that. It wasn't fair to me, and it sure as hell wasn't fair to our daughter. Still, there were days when I'd get those texts or calls from her, and for a split second I'd think, what if? What if she really was just going through something? What if there was some explanation that made sense? Something I just wasn't seeing? But then I'd snap out of it. There was no excuse for what she did, no explanation that would make it okay. One day, I got a call from her mom. Now, her mom and I always had a decent relationship. She was never really the type to butt into our marriage, and I appreciated that. So, when she called, I figured it might be different from all the other calls I'd been getting. Maybe she just wanted to talk things through without trying to force anything. But of course, I was wrong. She started off calm enough, asking how our daughter was doing, asking if I needed anything, which was nice, but I knew it was just the warm-up for the real reason she called. After a few minutes, she said, I just don't understand why you can't give her another chance. She's really sorry for what happened. You two have been together so long, and it's such a shame to throw it all away over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? That's what they were calling it now? I almost laughed, but I bit my tongue. I told her I understood where she was coming from, but that this wasn't something I could forgive. I explained again that trust was broken, and without that, there was no marriage to save. She didn't seem to get it, though. She just kept pushing, saying I was overreacting and that I wasn't thinking about the long term. That's when I lost my patience. Look, I said, I get that you want to defend your daughter, but this isn't something that can be fixed with an apology. She accused me of something terrible, and I can't live with that hanging over my head. I have to think about my daughter's future, and this is what's best for her. Her mom sighed, clearly frustrated. But she's your wife. Don't you owe it to her to at least try? That hit a nerve. No, I don't owe her anything after what she put me through. I didn't do anything wrong, and I've been dealing with the fallout of her actions ever since. I'm done with this. After that, the conversation fizzled out. Her mom wasn't happy with my decision, but I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into changing my mind. I hung up the phone and just sat there for a while, trying to calm down. It seemed like no matter what I said, nobody understood where I was coming from. Everyone kept acting like this was just some minor mistake, something we could sweep under the rug and forget about. But it wasn't. A few days later, my lawyer called with an update. The custody situation was moving forward, and from what he said, things were looking good for me. There was a strong chance I'd get primary custody, especially with the evidence we had of my wife's outburst. That was a bit of relief, but I knew it wasn't over yet. There was still a long way to go, and I had to be prepared for whatever might come next. One of the hardest things about all of this was trying to keep things normal for my daughter. She's too young to understand what's going on, but I could tell she sensed the tension. She'd get fussy more often, and sometimes she'd just cry for no reason. I tried my best to keep her routine the same, but it wasn't easy when everything around us was falling apart. I remember sitting with her in the evenings, feeding her or playing with her toys, and I'd wonder what her life would be like growing up in the middle of all this chaos. It broke my heart to think about it. I didn't want her to grow up in a broken home, but staying together for the sake of appearances wasn't the answer either. I wanted her to grow up in a stable, safe environment, even if that meant doing it on my own. As the days went on, I focused more and more on that, on making sure my daughter was okay, on getting through the legal stuff, and on moving forward. I stopped caring as much about what other people thought or said. It was clear they didn't understand, and I wasn't going to waste any more energy trying to make them see my side. At the end of the day, I knew what was right for me and my daughter. That's all that mattered. Everyone else could think whatever they wanted. As things kept moving forward, the reality of what I was doing hit me harder every day. It wasn't just about signing papers or going through court dates anymore. It was about closing a chapter of my life that I never thought would end like this. But honestly, as tough as it all was, I felt like I was doing the right thing. There was no other choice. Staying in a marriage where trust was completely shattered wasn't an option. I spent a lot of time reflecting during those days. I thought back to when we first got married, how happy we were. We had dreams, plans for the future, all the typical stuff you talk about when you're newlyweds. We used to laugh at the idea of getting old together, watching our kids grow up, traveling the world. I guess in some ways, I was still mourning the loss of that version of us, the couple who thought they had it all figured out. But that version of us was long gone, and there was no bringing it back. The messages from family and friends never really stopped, but I started responding less and less. It became exhausting explaining myself over and over, like a broken record. People would ask me, "Why don't you give her another chance? Don't you think she deserves to explain herself?" But the truth is, she had her chance. She had plenty of chances to explain herself, and she never did. Not in a way that made any sense, anyway. All she ever said was that she was sorry. Sorry isn't enough when you accuse someone of something that could destroy their life. One afternoon, I was sitting in my daughter's room watching her play with some blocks. She had this huge smile on her face, completely unaware of everything going on around her. In that moment, I realized she was the reason I couldn't let myself get sucked back into the mess. I had to stay strong for her. I couldn't afford to get distracted by the guilt trips and the what-ifs people kept throwing my way. My job was to give her a stable life, no matter what. The next big step was the court hearing for custody. I won't lie, I was nervous as hell. I knew I had a strong case, but there's always that lingering doubt, especially as a father. There's this feeling that no matter what, the system leans more toward the mother. It's not something anyone really says out loud, but it's always in the back of your mind. When the day finally came, my stomach was in knots. I sat in the courtroom waiting for the hearing to start, and the reality of the situation hit me all over again. My wife was sitting across from me, looking nervous too, but I couldn't bring myself to feel anything about it. The part of me that would have cared about how she was feeling, that part was gone. All I cared about now was the outcome. The hearing itself was pretty straightforward. My lawyer presented all the evidence we had. The video footage of her attacking me, the false accusations she'd made, the way she'd put our daughter in the middle of it all. My wife's lawyer tried to downplay everything, of course. They brought up the usual stuff, like how she was under stress, how being a new mom can mess with your emotions, and so on. But none of it explained why she'd gone to the extreme of accusing me of something so awful. When it was all said and done, the judge granted me primary custody. My wife would get supervised visitation, and that was it. As much as I felt relieved, I wasn't exactly jumping for joy. I didn't want it to be this way. I wanted my daughter to have both of her parents in her life, but not at the expense of her safety or growing up in a toxic environment. So, while I was glad the court saw things from my perspective, it was bittersweet. Leaving the courtroom that day, I felt a weird mix of emotions. I was relieved, sure, but I also felt like a weight had finally lifted. All the pressure from the divorce, the custody battle, everything. It wasn't fully over yet, but it felt like I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. My wife tried reaching out a few more times after that, mostly asking if we could work something out with the custody arrangement. But I stood my ground. I wasn't going to give in just because she was feeling sorry now. It was too little. Too late. I wasn't going to risk my daughter's well-being for the sake of making things easier for anyone else. As time went on, things started to settle. I got into a routine with my daughter, making sure her life stayed as normal as possible. That became my focus, her. I wanted to give her the best life I could, one where she didn't have to grow up surrounded by chaos or uncertainty. Looking back on everything, I realized just how much I'd grown throughout the whole ordeal. I used to be the kind of guy who avoided conflict at all costs, the one who wanted to keep the peace no matter what. But this situation forced me to stand up for myself, to fight for what was right, even when it felt like the whole world was against me. I learned that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean everyone will be happy with you. And that's okay. In the end, I know I made the best decision for me and my daughter. It wasn't the life I had planned for us, but it was the life we had now, and I was determined to make it the best it could be. I stopped worrying so much about what other people thought or whether they understood my choices. I knew what was right, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me second guess that. As for my wife, I honestly don't know what the future holds for her. I hope she gets the help she needs, whatever that looks like. But I've moved on from trying to fix things or understand why it all happened. Some things don't have a neat explanation, and that's just how life goes sometimes. Now, every night when I put my daughter to bed, I feel a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. It's just me and her now, and that's more than enough. Update. A few weeks after the court ruling, I finally found out why my wife had done it. To be honest, I had stopped expecting any real explanation at that point. I had already accepted that I might never fully understand what went through her mind that day. But then, one evening, out of nowhere, I got a long message from her. In the message, she said that the whole reason for the accusation, everything that happened, was because of a dream. Yes, a dream. She explained that she had this vivid nightmare about our daughter being sexually assaulted, and when she woke up and saw me changing her diaper, her mind somehow mixed up the dream with reality. When I first read it, I had no idea what to even say. A dream? That was the reason my entire life got turned upside down? I sat there, staring at my phone, just trying to wrap my head around it. I couldn't believe it. I mean, we all have bad dreams, right? But for her to wake up and immediately act like it had actually happened, to accuse me of something so disgusting based on a nightmare, it was just too much to process. She went on to say she was sorry again, but it didn't really make a difference anymore. The damage was already done. It didn't matter that it was triggered by a dream. She still called the police. She still attacked me. She still made the choice to accuse me of something so horrible without even thinking it through. I sat there thinking about what she must have felt in that moment, but it still didn't justify what she did. How could she not take a second to calm down, to realize it was just a dream? I couldn't even begin to imagine how someone could confuse a nightmare with real life, especially to the point of nearly destroying her family over it. As much as it explained what set her off, it didn't change how I felt. It didn't make things better or easier. If anything, it made me more frustrated. How could she let a dream control her actions like that? How could she believe even for a second that I was capable of something so horrible? I guess in her mind, this was her way of giving me an explanation. But for me, it just solidified the fact that we were done. There was no fixing this. No amount of therapy or apologies could make me forget what she put me through, dream or not. At the end of the day, the reason didn't matter as much as the result. Our marriage was over, and I was focused on moving forward, just me and my daughter.